Standard pop culture paints a specific image of our early relatives: muscular men clutching spears, bravely taking down a woolly mammoth. We want to believe we were born as heroes. But the fossils of our earliest ancestor in the genus Homo tell a different story. 2.5 million years ago, Homo habilis was less than 5 feet tall, carried 0 weapons, and occupied a deeply unsettling space between ape and human. This skull belongs to that prototype. The geometry is jarring compared to our own. Notice the narrow, sloping forehead, the high-set eyes, and a protruding, almost muzzle-like jaw. This anatomy was built for an animal that still spent its nights sleeping high in trees, watching the grass and waiting for the sun to rise. Our earliest human relative was a vulnerable prey animal, constantly watching its back. Eventually, the forests began thinning. As the climate dried out, dense safe zones vanished, forcing Homo habilis onto the open African savanna. That new landscape was swarming with specialists designed to hunt primates. There were robust saber-toothed cats hiding in the brush, and Chasmoporthetes, massive, long-legged hyenas that sprinted with the speed of a modern cheetah. Even drinking water was a life-or-death gamble against giant crocodiles waiting at the river's edge. Forensics prove how lethal these encounters were. This is a reconstruction of a Homo habilis foot fossil known as O8. The entire front half was cleanly severed, and the break patterns perfectly match the bite of a massive crocodile. Descending from the trees left these hominids exposed, small, slow, and weaponless in a landscape dominated by apex predators. Since hunting large prey was a death sentence, Homo habilis operated as the savanna's smartest vultures. They survived through high-stakes smash-and-grab operations. A troop would watch a pride of lions from the shadows, waiting for the predators to finish devouring an antelope. Once the cats wandered off to sleep, a tiny window of opportunity opened. By the time habilis reached the carcass, the lions had eaten the easiest meat, leaving only massive leg bones behind. Hominid jaws lack the power to crush thick bone the way a hyena can. To solve that deficit, they used these. This is the Oldowan stone chopper. It has no symmetry and no artistic flair, just a rounded side for a palm to grip and a jagged, sharp edge designed purely for smashing and cutting. Tactical patience and a sharp rock provided a way to survive that speed and strength alone couldn't offer. Intelligence became their primary weapon against starvation. Bashing 2 rocks together randomly just gives you gravel and a bruised thumb. To create a functional tool, habilis had to exploit a property called conchoidal fracture, which dictates how uniform stones break in smooth waves. A toolmaker strikes a core stone with a hammerstone at an angle less than 90 degrees to pop off a sharp flake. This shows abstract thought. Habilis projected a mental template of a knife onto a raw rock before ever making a strike. This technology unlocked bone marrow, a dense packet of pure fat and protein that no other animal on the savanna could reach. This marrow funded an expensive biological upgrade. While their ancestors operated on 400 cubic centimeters of brain capacity, the Homo habilis brain was ballooning to 600 cubic centimeters. This created a perfect feedback loop. A high-quality diet powered larger brains, and larger brains invented superior survival strategies to find more food. To survive the open plains, habilis banded together in troops of up to 80 individuals. If a leopard attacked, dozens of screaming, rock-throwing hominids could create enough chaotic mobbing defense to intimidate the predator. Fossil records also showed the size gap between males and females was actively closing. This suggests a move away from fighting for harems and a shift toward pair bonding to help protect their slow-growing infants. This cooperation led to a profound discovery at Olduvai Gorge in 1962. Paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey uncovered a highly unusual configuration of volcanic rocks that nature alone could not have formed. She found a 12 by 10-foot circle made of lava stones, spaced roughly 2 feet apart. These rocks likely anchored wooden poles and thorny branches, creating a stable windbreak. Organizing rocks to build a shelter represents the invention of the indoors. It was the moment a creature stopped adapting to the world and started building a safe space inside it. Homo habilis was incredibly successful, surviving on Earth for nearly 1 million years, more than 3 times the current lifespan of modern humans. But erratic global shifts eventually destroyed their niche. The mosaic of trees and grass they relied on vanished, transforming into a harsh, arid desert. habilis was eventually replaced by their own upgraded descendants, the taller, faster Homo erectus, who was built to stride across the open desert. While Homo habilis could only grunt and gesture, the neurological hardware for complex speech, Broca's area, was already physically wiring itself into their expanding brains. Homo habilis was humanity's biological booster rocket. This weaponless prototype did the grueling evolutionary heavy lifting that launched our lineage, and once orbit was achieved, the booster quietly fell away. Walking down a busy city street, you are surrounded by thousands of people who are, biologically speaking, the exact same make and model as you. This biological monoculture is a recent development. For most of our history, hominids were just one character in a crowded cast of human-like species. 2 million years ago, the African landscape was dominated by massive scimitar-toothed cats and giant straight-tusked elephants. Our early ancestors, like Homo habilis, survived by hiding in the tree canopy. On the savanna floor, these early hominids faced a biological gauntlet, where every step away from the trees carried the threat of almost certain death. Then the environment fractured. Geological activity in the African Rift Valley created physical barriers that isolated a small pocket of hominids from the main population. In this dry, resource-scarce environment, natural selection accelerated. Biologists call this allopatric speciation, where intense environmental stress forces rapid evolutionary change. Short legs and tree climbing adaptations were phased out in favor of longer limbs and a fluid, upright stride. This pressure cooker produced Homo erectus. Forged by these specific environmental demands, this population emerged as the first hominid built specifically to conquer the horizon. Their facial architecture was built for impact, featuring a solid bone visor over the eyes and an aggressively sloping forehead. But their most significant adaptation was the projecting nose. Constant exposure to dry air can damage lung tissue. By extending the nasal cavity, they created an internal chamber that humidifies air on the inhale and traps vital moisture on the exhale. This facial engineering broke their dependence on humid jungles, allowing them to cross arid savannas and eventually push out of Africa entirely. As they expanded, the species traded the safety of fast physical growth for a long, vulnerable childhood. This kept the brain plastic, allowing it to learn complex social rules and behaviors. This capacity for learning enabled the active creation of fire. By striking iron pyrite against stone, they could produce sparks on demand. Controlled fire provided a force field against predators and the microclimate required to migrate into freezing environments like ancient Germany. Controlled fire also allowed them to cook. Heating meat and tubers pre-digests the food, gelatinizing starches and making proteins easier to absorb. This chart shows how cooking provided a massive caloric surplus. The body spent less energy on digestion and routed that surplus to fund the high energy demands of a growing brain. Fire was the external technology that covered the biological cost of human intelligence. This intelligence is evident in the Acheulean hand axe. Crafting this symmetrical edge required the maker to visualize the final tool within a raw lump of stone. Using these axes alongside projectile bolas, they shifted from scavengers to predators capable of hunting 4-ton rhinos and elephants. Hunting megafauna requires strict coordination. The human-like shape of the hyoid bone found in Homo erectus specimens suggests they possessed the mechanical hardware for an articulate proto-language. Their cognitive development included the construction of physical dwellings and the use of red ochre pigments, the earliest evidence of abstract social identity. Through fire, tools, and social coordination, the prey had become the undisputed apex predator of the planet. Their global empire lasted for roughly 2 million years, a span of time that dwarfs the 300,000-year history of modern humans. But their reign eventually met a drastically shifting climate. Across Southeast Asia, vast open savannas were completely swallowed by dense rainforest. Their bodies and strategies were engineered for long-distance running and clear sightlines. In a tangled jungle canopy, these strengths were no longer an advantage.
The environmental specialization that enabled their expansion ultimately evicted them when the global climate changed. Their lineage continued through isolated populations that evolved into new subspecies, such as the Neanderthals in the north and the smaller hominids on the island of Flores. Back in Africa, these isolated populations continued to adapt, eventually refining their biology into the current human operating system, Homo sapiens. Today, every single time we use a blade or cook a meal, we are utilizing the technological foundations they pioneered. Homo erectus was without question the ultimate master of adaptation for their era, yet they eventually hit a biological wall. If our own environment shifts as drastically as theirs did, will our species last even a fraction of their 2-million-year dynasty?
Tracking the human lineage back into the Middle Pleistocene reveals a period where distinct boundaries between ancient hominins and modern humans begin to blur. In 1907, workers in a freezing industrial sandpit in Mauer, Germany, unearthed a physical specimen that would challenge the existing rules of human evolution. Digging through heavy sediment, a worker spotted a bone jutting out from the rock face. It was a massive mandible, pulled from the earth on a routine industrial shift. This jawbone was physically immense and lacked a chin entirely. It was a heavy, archaic structure that appeared far too primitive for a human. Yet the teeth embedded within this bone were small, with delicate canines that resembled those of a modern human. The combination of a brutish bone structure and modern teeth created a paradox, leading researchers to classify this successful and widely distributed species as Homo heidelbergensis. Living across Africa and Eurasia, these populations survived the freezing, harsh climates of the Northern Hemisphere. Their bodies adapted to the cold through a stocky, barrel-shaped build. They were taller than older hominins, with thick leg bones designed for physical endurance in brutal environments. Their facial features included prominent, heavy brow ridges, but they also possessed vertical nasal openings, a trait found in modern humans. Beneath these thick skulls, the brain case was growing rapidly. Compared to earlier species, their cranial capacity showed a significant increase in volume. While their frames were built for Ice Age survival, their expanding brains supported increasingly modern cognitive capacities. These cognitive shifts are visible in how they managed their environment, particularly in the ancient marshlands where they hunted. Heidelbergensis were the first hominins to live as apex predators. Rather than scavenging, they actively hunted megafauna like the straight-tusked elephant. They utilized the landscape as a tool, coordinating in groups to herd massive animals into deep mud. Once the prey was trapped in the swamp, the group could attack from a position of safety. To avoid the risks of a pure meat diet, they maintained a sophisticated knowledge of plants. Excavations show they foraged over 200 species, including nuts and berries, to balance their nutritional intake. Their engineering skills produced refined Acheulean tools. These symmetrical hand axes were thinner, lighter, and more effective than any tools made by their ancestors. They also organized their labor. Instead of making tools at random, they carried raw materials to dedicated workspaces, factory floors established on large stone slabs. Their survival was no longer a matter of luck, but the result of coordinated mastery over the natural world. This mastery reached its height with the engineering of the Shoningen spears, the earliest known examples of complex wooden weaponry. These 2.5-meter javelins were balanced weight forward, with the center of gravity positioned exactly like a modern track and field javelin. This design allowed for accurate throwing from 35 meters away. For the first time, hunters could strike lethal blows from a distance, significantly lowering the mortality rate for the group. They also pioneered combinatorial technology by attaching stone points to wooden shafts. They used animal sinew and heated resin as binding agents to fuse different materials together. Executing this process requires abstract thought. A hunter must conceptualize a finished product that does not exist in nature and gather dissimilar parts to build it. This technological step indicates a level of abstract logic that characterizes modern human engineering. These complex behaviors raise a question of communication. Coordinating a large-scale hunt or teaching spear construction requires a shared language. Microscopic evidence on their teeth provides a look into how their brains were organized for communication.
When cutting meat, they would hold the food in their teeth and pull, occasionally striking the enamel with a stone tool. The specific, consistent angle of these scratches across the species proves extreme right-handed dominance. Right-handedness is a marker of brain lateralization. In humans, a dominant left hemisphere is the location of the language processing centers. Combined with ear and throat bones tuned for human frequencies, this neural wiring suggests they were speaking to each other. Evidence of social complexity appears at the Terra Amata settlement in France, where they constructed seasonal shelters with rock foundations and branch roofs. They used vibrant red ochre for decoration and carved patterns into bone. Perforated fossils have been found that were likely threaded and worn as jewelry. The most profound evidence of their social structure lies at the bottom of a limestone shaft in Spain, the Pit of Bones. At the base of this shaft, researchers recovered the remains of 28 individuals who were placed there by their community. There are no marks from predators, and the location rules out accidental falls. This was a deliberate act of communal disposal. Establishing a designated place for the dead suggests the existence of grief, sentimentality, and a shared social identity. These populations did not simply disappear from the fossil record. They evolved in response to their environments. In the north, those facing the European ice ages continued to adapt to the extreme cold, eventually becoming the Neanderthals. The populations that remained in Africa faced different environmental pressures and evolved along a separate path. They were a people who built homes, wore jewelry, and planned for the future with engineered weaponry and spoken language. These populations represent the common ancestral link for everyone alive today, standing at the base of the lineage for both Neanderthals and modern humans.
For over a century, the story of human evolution featured a very specific villain, the knuckle-dragging, club-wielding Neanderthal. This image of a dim-witted brute, incapable of standing upright, was ingrained for generations, a convenient evolutionary dead end to make our own survival look inevitable. That arrogant assumption fell apart in 2010. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute sequenced the Neanderthal genome, allowing us to read their ancient DNA for the very first time. The sequencing revealed a startling biological reality. Virtually every non-African person alive today carries between 1 to 3% Neanderthal DNA. Some geneticists argue that a significant portion of their total ancestry survives today, scattered broadly across the modern population. Our ancestors assimilated the Neanderthals into the human population. This leaves us with a profound question. What ancient traits are currently operating inside our bodies right now? Visible physical traits often trace directly back to Neanderthal adaptations. Their variants, evolved for the low-light northern latitudes of Ice Age Europe, contributed to lighter skin pigmentation, red or blonde hair, and blue eyes in modern populations. Further down, we inherited hidden biological machinery. We carry their blood-clotting variants, an incredibly useful trait for surviving injuries during close-quarters mammoth hunts, though today, those same variants slightly increase our risk of strokes. This chart compares average modern human cranial capacity against the Neanderthal average. While our brains average roughly 1,300 cubic centimeters, male Neanderthals averaged 1,600 cubic centimeters, a difference of roughly 30%. Their brain structure was highly specialized. The skull was elongated from back to front, making room for expanded sensory processing regions. Their eye sockets were 15% larger than ours, providing the visual acuity needed to hunt in long, dark winters. These were highly tuned evolutionary assets, belonging to an apex survivor in a brutal environment. The biological evidence for complex speech is strong. We share exact mutations in the FOXP2 gene required for clear articulation. High-resolution CT scans of their fossilized inner ears confirm they possessed hearing optimized for the high-frequency range necessary to distinguish complex consonants. They utilized this communication to transmit knowledge. We find identical, highly complex Mycocochian hand axes across thousands of miles, from Germany all the way to Siberia. This level of technical craftsmanship required conceptual explanation to pass between generations. They also purposefully engineered their landscapes.
Soil records show they used controlled burns to clear dense undergrowth for hunting. They even built specialized processing camps to systematically boil and extract dense bone fat from massive herbivores, balancing their carnivorous diets to avoid protein poisoning. Inside caves, archaeology reveals a rich inner world. At Shanidar, they deliberately buried their dead with offerings of flower pollen. In Spain, they created red ochre hand stencils and abstract geometric art over 60,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens ever reached the continent. Their capacity for language, art, and environmental management reflects a high level of abstract thought and societal organization. Our emotional landscape is also shaped by their genetics. Modern humans carry Neanderthal variants of the oxytocin receptor gene, directly influencing how we build trust, manage social memory, and form familial bonds. That biological predisposition for compassion is written into the bone. The fossil record contains individuals who survived for years with debilitating severe injuries. They lived because their groups consistently fed, protected, and cared for them. Other inherited emotional traits acted as shields. Genetic variants that make modern humans susceptible to heightened anxiety or intense stress responses originally served as a vital danger radar. In a world full of apex predators, hypervigilance kept vulnerable family units alive. Traits we now associate with neurodiversity were likely essential assets. Intense, hyper-focused attention to detail and extreme sensory pattern recognition provided critical advantages for manufacturing complex stone tools and tracking herd movements across fractured terrain. Our capacity for deep empathy, group care, and cognitive diversity did not emerge solely with our own species. We inherited them from ancestors often dismissed as simple brutes. Given their intelligence, physical dominance, and tight-knit social networks, we must look at what forces were actually capable of overwhelming them. Around 50,000 years ago, relentless climate shifts abruptly dropped temperatures across Europe. The dense forests where Neanderthals utilized their explosive, close-quarters ambush hunting tactics vanished, replaced by sprawling, hostile open tundra. Then, colossal volcanic eruptions tore through Italy and the Caucasus. Massive clouds of ash and sulfur blocked the sun, triggering an ecological collapse and starving out the food chain they relied on. The final environmental blow came from space. During the Lachamps excursion, Earth's magnetic field weakened to roughly 5% of its usual strength, bathing the higher northern latitudes in harmful cosmic radiation and driving severe health crises among the remaining population. Homo sapiens arrived to find a population already collapsing under an apocalyptic cascade of natural disasters. Our presence merely provided the final competitive pressure on a group already decimated by its environment. As the environment degraded, fragments of the Neanderthal population encountered the expanding waves of Homo sapiens. They mingled, they formed alliances, and they interbred. The proof is in the physical remains. We find ancient hybrid skeletons featuring a clear mosaic of traits, craniums shaped like early modern humans, but anchored by the heavy brow ridge and robust jaw of a Neanderthal. This legacy endures physically and emotionally within the biology of billions of people today. Human identity is not defined by strict species boundaries or genetic purity. It is a deeply interconnected web of ancient lineages sharing technology, territory, and bloodlines over hundreds of thousands of years. Our core traits, our empathy, our compassion, and our emotional depth, are a shared blueprint. Every time we connect, care for our injured, or seek out our family, we are echoing the Neanderthals. Until quite recently, the map of late human evolution was considered fully drawn. You had Homo sapiens expanding out of Africa and Neanderthals occupying Europe and parts of Asia. For decades, those were the only recognized players on the board. But 90,000 years ago, the Altai Mountains in Siberia hosted a very different reality. In 2008, researchers excavating the dirt floor of Denisova Cave were sifting through thousands of shattered animal bones. Down in the prehistoric refuse, they isolated a single unassuming fragment of a juvenile's pinky finger. That tiny piece of bone contained enough data to expand the late human family tree by an entirely new branch. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute extracted and sequenced the bone's mitochondrial DNA. Because this specific type of genetic material passes in an unbroken chain strictly from mother to daughter, it serves as a highly accurate tool for tracing distinct lineages. This chart visualizes the genetic distance between late human species. If you compare modern humans and Neanderthals, the genetic sequences differ by exactly 202 base pairs, but the DNA from the pinky bone plots completely off the previous scale. It showed 385 genetic differences, indicating a split from our common human ancestor roughly 1 million years ago. The numbers provided absolute proof of a distinct species, but researchers faced a major problem. They had no skeleton, no skull, and no facial structure to identify them. For the first time in scientific history, a human ancestor was defined entirely by a genome in search of a physical fossil. They became known as the Denisovans, a biological ghost. Human evolution operates like a braided stream. Distinct lineages separate across deep time, then weave back together to swap genes. We pinpoint this crossing at Denisova 11, a bone fragment found in 2012. Her DNA revealed a full-blooded Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Statistically, finding a first-generation hybrid in a cave that has yielded only a tiny handful of fossils is nearly impossible unless that specific type of interbreeding was a frequent, common occurrence. Ancient human species did not live in isolated, competitive bubbles. They participated in a highly interactive, cosmopolitan ancient world where different populations regularly met and mated. To see what these people actually looked like, we have to move to Harbin, China, 1933. While building a bridge over a river, a Chinese laborer dug a massive, unusual skull out of the river mud. Knowing its historical value and determined to hide it from occupying Japanese forces, the laborer wrapped the skull up and dropped it down an abandoned well. It sat there completely undisturbed for nearly 90 years. When scientists finally analyzed it in 2021, they found a cranium with a brain capacity matching our own, but encased in entirely different architecture. The skull featured thick brow ridges, absolutely huge teeth, with absolutely no chin. Researchers eventually managed to extract ancient proteins and a highly degraded trace of DNA from a single tooth left in the jaw. When they sequenced the sample, it matched the Denisovan genome from Siberia perfectly. After a decade of searching, science finally had a face for the biological ghost. The Denisovans were highly robust, powerfully built humans, distinctly adapted to harsh, freezing climates. Their adaptability allowed them to command a massive geographic territory. Denisovan populations spanned from hunting woolly rhinos on the Siberian steppes all the way down to surviving in the steaming tropical jungles of Southeast Asia. In Denisova Cave, archaeologists uncovered a polished greenstone bracelet dating to a time before modern humans occupied the area. The stone was carefully shaped and featured a hole drilled with a high-speed rotational tool. Further south, near a hot spring in Tibet, researchers found a series of handprints and footprints pressed deliberately into fossilized mud. They were left by Denisovan children playing in the dirt nearly 200,000 years ago. These artifacts dismantled the long-held bias that only Homo sapiens possessed a deep aesthetic sense, forward planning, and complex culture. If the Denisovans were so highly capable and globally distributed, we have to ask why they're no longer here. The physical remains of northern populations fade from the Siberian archaeological record roughly 50,000 years ago, but genetic data suggests that southern Denisovan groups, living on isolated islands, may have survived until as recently as 15,000 years ago. Rather than direct violent extinction, the data points towards assimilation. As expanding populations of Homo sapiens moved into Asia, they consistently interbred with the native Denisovans.
Over millennia, the smaller, distinct Denisovan populations simply dissolved into the much larger waves of modern humans. The Denisovans didn't vanish into thin air. Their genetic lineage vanished into us. Today, up to 4 to 6% of Denisovan DNA still exists within the modern human genome, appearing prominently in East Asian, Melanesian, and Aboriginal Australian populations. This surviving DNA provides clear benefits. Through a process called adaptive introgression, modern humans borrowed the highly specialized environmental survival traits the Denisovans had spent hundreds of thousands of years developing.
You can see this clearly on the high-altitude Tibetan Plateau. Modern Tibetans carry the Denisovan EPAS1 gene, a specific mutation that prevents blood from dangerously thickening, allowing them to easily thrive in the dangerously thin mountain air. In Southeast Asia, early Homo sapiens absorbed specific Denisovan immune system alleles, instantly granting them biological defenses against novel tropical diseases they had never encountered before leaving Africa. Humanity is not a solitary species walking a straight line to the present. We are a living mosaic of ancient populations, and the Denisovans are a biological mechanism actively keeping modern humans alive today. In 2003, a joint expedition of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists were sifting through 6 meters of wet, clumping clay. It was a grueling excavation. The soil conditions were so damp that the buried bones had the consistency of wet blotting paper, threatening to dissolve entirely at the touch of a trowel. They were digging inside Liang Bua, a massive limestone cathedral of a cave on the Indonesian island of Flores. Their mission was straightforward. They were tracking the migration routes of modern human ancestors traveling from mainland Asia down to Australia. Then, deep in the clay, a researcher struck a skull. It was labeled LB1. Based strictly on its small dimensions, the excavation team initially assumed they had unearthed the remains of a child. A close inspection of the jaw quickly dismantled that theory. The permanent teeth were fully erupted, and the molars showed heavy wear patterns from a long life of chewing tough food. This was a fully grown 30-year-old woman. And she stood exactly 3.5 feet tall. The dimensions defied basic anatomical expectations. The team was looking at a weather-beaten, mature adult, completely contained within a skeletal frame the size of a modern human toddler. Her bone structure was a biological mosaic. She possessed primitive wrist bones identical to a chimpanzee and a brain the size of a grapefruit. Yet she was found alongside finely napstone blades and charred bones that proved this population systematically controlled fire. When the findings were published, the scientific establishment pushed back. Prominent researchers argued this could not be a new species. They claimed LB1 was a modern Homo sapien who had suffered from a rare genetic disorder, like microcephaly, which physically restricts brain and body growth. Over the next 12 months, the excavation team kept digging. They pulled roughly 15 more incomplete skeletons from the exact same clay layer. Every single one shared the same tiny stature, flat feet, and primitive wrists, rendering the odds of a localized, identical genetic defect mathematically impossible. These bones belonged to a healthy, thriving, distinct species. To understand how a human being shrinks to the size of a 3-year-old, we have to examine the biological sandbox that forced them to adapt. Isolated landmasses follow a principle known as the island rule. In these environments, nature acts like a strict accountant. A finite island provides a severely limited supply of space and daily calories. For the small animals that wash ashore, this isolation is an opportunity. Without massive mainland predators like wolves or large cats around to eat them, a small rodent or bird can scale up over generations to fill empty ecological niches. On Flores, this unique dynamic produced literal monsters. The most dominant apex predator on the island was the Komodo dragon. This is the largest living lizard in the world, growing up to 10 feet long, packing 70 kilograms of muscle, and hunting with highly venomous serrated teeth. Above them, the canopy was patrolled by a giant 6'5" prehistoric relative of the marabou stork. Armed with a beak the size and shape of a literal spear, this massive bird was capable of plucking juvenile hominids right off the ground. Down in the dense brush, rats scurried across the limestone. But on Flores, these rodents measured over 0.5 meters in length. It was a hostile, closed ecosystem. To survive alongside giant venomous reptiles and massive carnivorous birds, an invading species had only 2 options: completely dominate the food chain or alter its own biology to fit the island's calorie constraints. For large animals, the island rule dictates the process of insular dwarfism. Massive bodies require thousands of calories a day just to survive. When food is scarce, the largest individuals are the first to starve, leaving only smaller individuals to reproduce and pass on their genetics. This metabolic math transformed the stegodon. This ancient, massive relative of the modern elephant washed ashore on Flores and shrank over thousands of generations until the adults were roughly the size of a cow or a donkey. When our early human ancestors arrived on Flores, likely clinging to natural rafts of uprooted trees after a tsunami, the island subjected them to this same biological pressure. To keep their metabolic lights on in a calorie-starved jungle, they shrank to 3 feet tall. Their bodies adapted to the rugged terrain. They developed flat, disproportionately long feet that forced them into a high-stepping gait to navigate dense routes. And while their brain volume dropped, their neural density remained high, preserving their intelligence. Reconstructions of the jaw and skull base suggest these individuals lacked the physical vocal tract needed for articulate speech. To coordinate a hunt, they likely relied on a system of whistles and bird-like chitters, sounds capable of signaling complex tactics to trap 800-pound stegodons without the need for vowels or consonants. This reduction in size was a highly successful survival mechanism. It allowed a human-like mind to survive in a habitat where a larger body would have quickly starved. Look at this data visualization mapping early human migration. Homo floresiensis were not ancient relics of a lost epoch. The fossils in Liang Bua Cave proved they were actively thriving on the island as recently as 50,000 years ago. That places them in our own historical neighborhood. While these tiny hunters were trapping elephants, our direct Homo sapien ancestors had already left Africa, painted the caves of Europe, and perfected complex hunting weaponry. Right at that 50,000-year mark, the Flores species abruptly vanishes from the fossil record. When researchers look at the soil layers, they find 2 primary suspects for the extinction. The first is geology. Flores sits directly on the volatile Pacific Ring of Fire. Soil samples reveal evidence of a massive eruption from Mount Kelimutu right at the time the bones disappear, an event that would have choked the vegetation and starved the island's food chain. The extinction was likely a 1-2 punch. A volcanic eruption severely weakened the ecosystem, and modern humans arrived on the shores of Flores shortly after, outcompeting the survivors for whatever limited resources remained. Today, the local Nage people of Central Flores maintain a highly specific oral tradition. They tell legends of the Ebu Gogo, a tribe of wild, 1-meter-tall forest dwellers with broad, flat noses and long arms, who relied on a strange, chittering whisper to communicate. The folklore describes a conflict that fractured when the Ebu Gogo began raiding village crops. In retaliation, the human villagers offered the creatures dry palm fiber as a peace gift. Once the creatures took the fiber deep into their cave, the villagers threw a burning torch inside, incinerating the inhabitants. The anatomical accuracy of these oral legends points toward a deep, mythologized cultural memory. These stories likely document the actual turf wars fought when the first modern humans reached the island and encountered the last survivors of a different lineage. This illustration has shaped our view of our own history. We are taught to see evolution as a neat, linear march from ancient apes straight to ourselves. But as this diagram shows, the reality is a messy, branching tree. Homo floresiensis was a successful evolutionary off-ramp, proving that hominids are animals subject to the same environmental laws as any other species. The remains in Liang Bua prove that our species is not a singular, inevitable outcome. We are one branch on a tree that was once crowded with different ways of being human. For decades, the story of human origins followed a straightforward sequence. The scientific consensus pointed to a single cradle of humanity in East Africa, producing the first anatomically modern humans roughly 200,000 years ago. That established timeline began to unravel because of a chance discovery. In the 1960s, miners working in a barite mine at Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, stumbled across a fossilized human skull. At the time, scientists interpreted the remains as a North African variation of a Neanderthal, dating them to a relatively recent 40,000 years ago. The site remained an anomaly until paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Hublem led a new excavation in 2004. His team uncovered additional human fossils buried alongside sophisticated Middle Stone Age artifacts. These artifacts presented a glaring contradiction. They were crafted using a meticulous prepared core technique to strike off specific, highly refined flakes. This advanced method of toolmaking did not align with the younger dating of the fossils, indicating that the initial assessment of the site's age was flawed. The evidence from this North African cave system upended the timeline of our origins and challenged the geography of human history. The breakthrough in determining the true age of the Jebel Erhoud fossils came not from the bones themselves, but from the tools found alongside them, specifically flint that had been burned in ancient campfires. To extract a precise date from these artifacts, researchers used thermoluminescence dating. When stone is intensely heated by a fire, the high temperatures reset an internal geological clock. By measuring the light emitted when reheated in a lab, scientists calculate exactly how much time has passed since that original campfire burned out. The lab results dated the campfire, and therefore the archaeological layer containing the human fossils, to roughly 315,000 years ago. This temporal jump doubled the accepted age of Homo sapiens. It relocated the oldest known physical evidence of our species out of the East African Rift Valley and into the northwest corner of the continent. If populations were already thriving across the continent over 300,000 years ago, we have to ask when and where the distinct traits that make us human actually assembled. The Jebel Erhoud fossils reveal a striking anatomical contradiction. Their facial structures were relatively flat and delicate, falling well within the modern human range. But their brain cases were elongated, low, and slightly flattened. This mix of modern and archaic features is an example of mosaic evolution. Becoming human was a piecemeal assembly of traits over hundreds of thousands of years, where specific features like a modern face developed long before the high, rounded skull shape we have today. The Jebel Erhoud discovery supports the Pan-African Network hypothesis. Researchers propose that early Homo sapiens emerged simultaneously across vast stretches of South, East, and North Africa, with varying physical traits developing in widespread, distinct populations. Paleoclimate data shows these groups were not entirely isolated. During periods roughly 300,000 years ago, massive climatic shifts created a green Sahara, where the desert transformed into fertile grasslands and expansive river systems. These sprawling green zones opened up continental highways. The hospitable environments allowed distant populations to migrate, intermingle, and share vital survival strategies, like complex toolmaking and the controlled use of fire. The biological and technological markers of our species were forged across a massive network. Early Homo sapiens were part of a diverse, interconnected phenomenon evolving in a shared melting pot. As this continental network flourished, some populations migrated beyond Africa far earlier than previously believed.
In Israel's Misliya Cave, scientists recovered a modern human jawbone that dates back nearly 200,000 years. Finds further east add layers of complexity. At a site in India, archaeologists uncovered advanced stone tools, utilizing the exact same meticulous preparation techniques seen in Africa, but dated to 385,000 years ago, though we lack the fossils to confirm exactly who crafted them. The environments connecting these regions were often accommodating. During wetter climate phases, the Arabian Peninsula featured lush lakes and grasslands, serving as a long-term hub where early populations from Africa and potentially Asia lived and adapted for millennia. Genetic data reveals these ancient travel routes flowed in multiple directions. Distinct archaeological and genetic markers indicate that some early Eurasian populations eventually migrated back into Africa, mixing with the groups already established there. Early human migration functioned as a continuous loop of intercontinental exchange, with populations radiating outward and flowing back together over thousands of generations. Within Africa, this mixing extended to different hominin lineages. The Iwo Elaru skull found in Nigeria is only 13,000 years old, yet it possesses a primitive bone structure that looks entirely different from other modern humans living at that same time. The physical evidence of this coexistence is corroborated by modern genetics. DNA analysis of contemporary West African populations reveals that up to 19% of their genome contains genetic material from an unknown source. Scientists refer to this as ghost DNA. It is a genetic signature inherited from a completely unidentified archaic hominin species that split off from our direct ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago. Early populations of Homo sapiens coexisted, interacted, and interbred with older, archaic species, permanently absorbing their genetic legacy into our modern genome. This timeline leaves a significant paradox. If anatomically early humans were widespread across Africa and pushing into the Middle East 300,000 years ago, we must investigate why the global expansion of our species didn't occur until roughly 60,000 years ago. For long stretches of history, environmental barriers penned early populations in. The fertile Sahara repeatedly dried out into an impassable desert, while harsh glacial periods in Eurasia created deeply inhospitable climates for groups adapted to warmer zones. To bypass those barriers, early humans needed new capabilities. Between 75,000 and 55,000 years ago, sites across southern Africa reveal a sudden flourishing of innovation, highlighted by artifacts like this engraved piece of ochre, a marker of abstract, symbolic thought. Alongside these early artistic expressions, populations invented finely crafted bone spearheads, developed systematic marine fishing, and established long-distance exchange networks for crucial raw materials. These cognitive and social advancements allowed early humans to extract significantly more resources from their environments. That increased efficiency supported larger, more stable populations, providing the demographic momentum necessary to finally sustain long-distance expansion across the globe. The archaeological record and modern genetics have replaced the linear model of human evolution. Our ancestry involves lineages that repeatedly adapted in isolation before flowing back together to exchange genes and technologies. Scientists now describe human history as a braided stream, where early human lineages constantly split apart, isolated, and rejoined. When looking up this vast, interconnected network, attempting to pinpoint the exact century or single cave where we became fully human is an impossible task. Modern humans are the product of an intercontinental mosaic, a tapestry of physical traits and behaviors assembled across hundreds of thousands of years. We spend our lives in climate-controlled rooms, bathed in artificial light and shielded by concrete walls. This comfort creates a powerful illusion. It's easy to believe that our technology and culture have finally severed our connection to the rules of biology. We often view the human species as the ultimate, perfected endpoint of an evolutionary ladder. You've seen the March of Progress, the famous linear sequence of a knuckle-walking ape gradually standing up to become a man. This tidy, straight line is a fundamental lie. If we aren't a divine endpoint, we have to ask why the human body is built like a makeshift patchwork of ancient animal parts. Our biology is a stolen archive, a collection of recycled traits proving we are completely entangled with the natural world. Tracing the human body backward in time reveals a map of older species. Every single anatomical feature you possess originated in a creature that came before you. Consider our closest living relatives. Beneath hair and muscle, a chimpanzee's arm bone is nearly identical to a human's in size, shape, and function. The most undeniable evidence of our past is hidden in how we develop. In the womb, the human embryo acts as a historical record of deep time. Very early in gestation, every human embryo develops a yolk sac, just like a developing bird or a reptile. But there is a strange detail. The human yolk sac is completely empty. We receive all nutrients through the placenta, making this structure functionally useless. This empty sac is a biological receipt. It is a leftover requirement from ancient egg-laying ancestors that we simply never threw away. Before we are even born, our bodies must follow a script written hundreds of millions of years ago by non-human creatures. Evolution has no foresight. It tinkers blindly, modifying whatever physical materials are already available to meet the immediate needs of survival.
This blind tinkering leaves us with dangerous flaws, like the shared opening for our air tube and our food tube. This anatomical glitch makes choking a uniquely common human hazard. Even our ability to walk and run upright is a compromise. Underneath it all, we are still operating on the fundamental skeletal chassis of an ape. Roughly 1.5 million years ago, a package of evolutionary patches appeared to make running possible, specifically our massive gluteus maximus muscles and thick, elastic Achilles tendons. We even rely on a specific cord in the neck called the nuchal ligament. It evolved for one makeshift purpose: to stop our heavy heads from pitching us onto our faces every time we run. The human body is a series of desperate physical patches slapped onto a primate frame just to keep us upright. Perhaps the most surprising part of our biology is the organ that makes our birth possible: the placenta. For the placenta to protect and nourish a fetus, it needs a specific layer of cells to merge into a single continuous sheet. The gene that triggers this merging is called syncytin. It is actually the disabled DNA of an ancient virus. This virus infected our early ancestors 100 million years ago. Biology simply hijacked its genetic code and repurposed it for mammalian reproduction. The continuation of the human race depends on a biological accident involving a tiny ancient pathogen. In prehistory, modern humans were not the only ones exploring the planet. A diverse cast of human species once walked alongside us, from the Neanderthals and Denisovans to the small-brained hobbits of Indonesia. With the planet crowded by so many different types of humans, we have to ask why they all vanished while we remained. It's often assumed that raw brain size or a capacity for violence gave us the edge, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Archaeological sleuthing reveals that raw materials for tools traveled vast distances in modern human networks. Our true advantage was behavioral flexibility and deep social networking. We endured the brutal shifts of the Ice Age through the strength of these networks. If one group fell on hard times, they could count on help from the tribe in the next valley. Human exceptionalism is a dangerous myth. We are highly social primates, carrying the entire biological history of Earth in our DNA. Because we are part of nature, the ongoing destruction of the natural world is a direct attack on our own life support system. We see the stakes in the crashing populations of insect pollinators. We still depend on these tiny creatures to produce the food we eat. If the wild dies, we die with it. Despite all our technology and culture, we are, in the end, still animals.